Okay, so since we are limited in time, let me. Okay, so I will do the introduction at the end because for those of you who don't know me, or for those of you who do know me and are wondering what I've been up to, I'll leave that for the end because the content of the class is much more important. The session is called My Two Commando Sons in the Israel Defense Forces. Why isn't this working? Defending the Jewish Triangle. And I will explain later on what I mean by the Jewish Triangle. So the purpose of this presentation is not to be an IDF 101. Even if I wanted it to be, I wouldn't be the right person to explain it, so I will keep it extremely basic. When you are looking at, when you're walking in Israel and you see a number of different soldiers, how do you distinguish one brigade from the next? There are many, many different brigades in the IDF, and they're all multifaceted. So my explanation over here is going to be very, very basic. As I mentioned, the Givati Brigade, which is one of the infantry brigades of the IDF, which both of my sons started in. One of them is no longer in it now. But the Givati Brigade is distinguished by wearing a purple beret. You'll usually see it over their shoulder. And there are, like I said, it's multifaceted. There are many aspects to every brigade. There are combat soldiers, non-combat soldiers, intelligence, administrative people, so on and so forth. In the combat soldier area, again, that's very multifaceted, but we'll break it down into two very, very basic units. One is called the Gedudim, a battalion which goes through, they are combat soldiers. They go through about 6 months of training. Then they get placed on the Kav, what's called on the line. They're put in active duty. But then there is also a group called the Sayeret, which is a special forces. They go through an extra period of about 8 or 9 months of specialized training above and beyond the initial 6 months. And the Sayeret, once they're finished, they are called in Hebrew Lohame Commando, which is combat soldiers, commando combat soldiers. The Givati symbol is the wolf surrounding a sword. This is to hint to us the famous story in the book of Judges of Samson, the great judge, who had conducted a battle with a bunch of foxes. The commandos are called Shu'alei Shimshon, Samson's foxes. Inside the commandos, every brigade has a commando unit, a Gadsar, if you will. It's called Gdud Sayeret. When you have sons in the army, you learn very quickly that almost their entire language, their entire vocabulary consists of acronyms, and they constantly are speaking in acronyms. So the Gadsar, the Gdud Sayeret, has, in most cases, has 3 basic components to it. Again, I'm only speaking for the Givati. One component is what's called the Palhan, the Plugat Habala V'Handasa. They, again, this is a very, very narrow, very basic interpretation. They are specializing in demolition and combat engineering. That is only one aspect. These are all frontline soldiers that are called in first. But this is one aspect of their specialization. Then there is the Palsar, what's called the Plugat Sayeret, or reconnaissance. This was the unit that my oldest son, Ezra, was in until he was moved, and I'll explain that in a minute. And lastly, there is the last component, which is called the Orev. This is actually not an acronym, this is a real word. Orev means raven, like the bird. And their specialization is anti-tank missiles. This is their logo. It's a little bit different from the one that I showed you before. Again, it's the fox wrapped around the sword, but there's also this little explosion in the background to combine all the different components, the Palchan, the demolition, the Palsar, and the Orev. Flying away. Now, I mentioned that my oldest son, Ezra, was moved out of Givati, and I'll talk about that in a minute, but here he is, my handsome son, my oldest son, Ezra, who is a first sergeant, a Samal Rishon in now what's a new unit that was created by the Chief of Staff of Israel. and that was him in civilian clothes. This is him in army uniform, but a little bit of a disclosure here. This is not actually him in uniform. This was a picture taken from his unit when he was in Givati, but since we are no longer allowed to put pictures of him in uniform for public consumption, he is not allowed to be shown in uniform. And that is because he is part of a new unit that was created by the Chief of Staff of Israel last year. It's a multi-dimensional unit of the Chief of Staff. Their nickname is called the Ghosts, the Rephaim. And what happened was that the Chief of Staff took some of the highly specialized units from all the different areas of the IDF, all the different commando units, all the different intelligence units, whether it be Air Force, ground soldiers, Navy, whatever it may be, took one specific tzevet, one specific squad from each one, and combined them to make a multi-dimensional unit that is going to be highly, highly specialized. And Ezra's unit was chosen for that. If you follow the Israeli news, there was several articles written about them last week in Israel National News, the Jerusalem Post, Israel Hayom, and they are known as the Ghosts. And this is their logo, which is an 8 wrapped around the sword, 8 symbolizing the number of their unit, 888 or 888. Here is a brief video for about 90 seconds so you to see a little bit of their practice exercises. Coming to a terrorist near you. So it was interesting because last Friday, after they were, Ezra wasn't coming home for Shabbat, and we were talking to him on Friday, and this was a week after they had filmed this video, and we asked him how his week was, and he said that it was a little boring and they felt a little useless, and we asked why, and he said because we were rehearsing for this video that we're sending out. And you know, I said it was spoken like a true combat soldier, because the bottom line is getting the job done without any of the fanfare. But you know, what we told him is that this week with this video, you also did 2 other things, which is number 1, you protected our peace of mind as civilians, but secondly, you also gave a lot of pause to our enemies, because this video was sent out on the Arab news channels as well, and it definitely made an impact. In fact, he joked with his commander when his commander told him to make sure that the group is ready in 30 minutes to do another exercise. He asked him when is he doing their hair and makeup. So he actually didn't get it at first, but he got it afterwards. My second son, Jesse, who is a Samal, is a sergeant, is also in, as I mentioned, in the Orev Givati. That is the unit that specializes in anti-tank missiles. That's him in civilian clothes, and that is actually him in uniform. And when this picture was being taken, this is what he was thinking: my dad will love this pic. And his dad does love this pic. But It's obvious that I'm proud, extremely proud of our Army, and especially my two oldest sons, but I'm actually proud of all my kids. So here's a shout out to all of them. This picture was taken at my son Michael's bar mitzvah, and my second son, Joey, my third son, Joey, actually helped me with this slideshow. So shout out to you, Joey. Thank you very, very much. Again, this story is not about, this session is not only about bragging about my kids, which I am very happy to do, but it's also about this component, this idea called the Jewish triangle. And it really comes from a sense of the Jewish army. The IDF, as we know it, has been in existence since the birth of the state of Israel. However, it is not the first Jewish army. There have been many. And I would like to give two examples of many examples where they were the ideal Jewish fighting force that would birth the idea of defending the Jewish triangle. So the year is 165 BCE. It's recorded in the book of Maccabees, chapter 4. The year is 165 BCE, and the period of history in Israel is called the Hasmonean dynasty, the Hashmonaim. And they are doing their best to fight off the Seleucid ruler Antiochus IV, or better known as Antiochus Epiphanes, once and for all. And this is, as you know, the period when the story of Hanukkah takes place. The battle is called the Battle of Emmaus. And here is a map. Now follow the laser because it's important. Here is Yerushalayim, okay? And here is this area called Emmaus. And if you go further west over here, that is the Mediterranean Sea. Now, there is a very narrow road, a narrow approach from the western part of Israel to Yerushalayim. And whoever controls this narrow approach to Jerusalem from the coast essentially controls the city of Jerusalem by deciding who and what goes in and out. This was true 2,000 years ago, and it was true to this very day, especially when it came to the War of Independence. You control that road, you control Jerusalem. Now, what was happening at the time was Yehudah Maccabi, Judah Maccabee, his fighting force was here in this area called Mitzpah, which is a little bit northwest of Jerusalem. Emmaus had the Seleucid Greek forces, an enormous army, but only half of them would go and attack Judah Maccabee and his forces in Mitzpah, following this red line over here towards Mitzpah. Judah Maccabee's intelligence people had told him that they were coming, and what he did was very unorthodox. In the middle of the night, he took his entire army and traveled down towards Emmaus using this blue line, evading the first half of the Seleucid army that was coming to attack him, and going to attack the unsuspecting armies, the second half of the Greeks in Emmaus. He gets there by morning. They were unsuspecting of it. They weren't prepared for it. They crush them, and whatever is remaining from them is being chased off towards the west. At the same time, the first half of the army appears at Mitzpah and finds nobody. They're wondering where they are. So what they do is double back to Emmaus. Judah Maccabee was very smart, and instead of chasing them all the way there and trying to plunder whatever they could, he told his soldiers, guys, there's a second battle that's to be fought over here. And so let's go back to Emmaus and hide, lying in wait for the first half that's about to come back. They do that. When they come back and they see that their fortress is up in smoke, they're not expecting anything either. They get to the fortress, and that's where Judah's army ambushes them and destroys them. It is recorded in the book of Maccabees and in other historical sources, but there's one very important aspect that I would like to indicate, and that was what Judah Maccabee told his forces before and after the battle. Before the battle, if you look over here, it says, "Do not fear their numbers or be afraid when they charge. Remember our ancestors were saved at the Sea of Reeds when Pharaoh was pursuing them with his forces. So let's cry to heaven and see if the Heavenly One will favor us and remember his covenant with our ancestors and crush this army in front of us today. Then all the Gentiles will know that there is someone who redeems and saves Israel." And later on, after the battle was successful, let me go back. After the battle was successful, as they returned, they sang hymns and songs of praise to heaven. God is good because his mercy endures forever. That day, Israel had a great deliverance. For those of you who are familiar with the geography of Israel, Emmaus is right around the area of Latrun. Incidentally, Emmaus is also a very significant spot for Christians, because this is where, according to the New Testament, Jesus first appeared to two of his disciples following the crucifixion and resurrection. There's a monastery there now, also right near Latrun. And also, incidentally, this battle and the guerrilla tactics used by Judah Maccabee is still studied and taught by modern war colleges today. Incredible. But what is most incredible, and really the essence of what I'm trying to explain over here, is that yes, Judah Maccabee was defending his land. Yes, they were defending their people, but they were also defending their way of life, their religion. For what is our Torah if it's not the guidebook for how to live our lives by the word of God? And so when Judah Maccabee fights, he is armed with his weapons, his horses, his cavalry, but his arsenal also includes faith, prayer, and covenant between God and Israel. Another battle that shows the essence of the same idea of the Jewish triangle is the battle also known from the book of Judges, from the story of Devorah and Barak ben Avinoam versus the king of Hatzor Yavin and his general Sisera. This battle took place in the northern part of Israel in the Jezreel Valley, Emek Israel. Hatzor is in the northeast of Israel. They had an enormous army and an extremely powerful kingdom. There were a lot of independent kingdoms other than the Israelite kingdom in the land of Israel at the time. And his army, combined with other armies, came from the west over here, and the army of Israel with Barak ben Avinoam and Devorah was to meet them, to gather first at the mountain of Tabor and meet them for battle. Devorah, the prophetess, tells Barak ben Avinoam, she summons him and tells him, God, Lord of Israel, has commanded, go take 10,000 Naphtalites and Zebulunites with you and lead them to the mountain of Tabor. I will draw Sisera, the commander of Yavin's army, his chariots and his troops over to you at Wadi Kishon, which is this over here. This is Wadi Kishon. I will draw Sisera, the commander of Yavin's army, his chariots with you over to Wadi Kishon, and I will deliver him into your hands. And what's Barak's reaction to this? Barak replied to her, if you accompany me, I will go. If not, I will not go. Now, it's very interesting over here because Barak's fear is also the people's fear. He wants the prophetess to accompany him, and he wants God with him in this battle. So while Barak may be a great tactician and a great military specialist, he is not exactly the spiritual leader that Judah Maccabee is or was, and he knew it too. So therefore, he subordinated himself to Devorah. And once again, this battle is won not by the might of our swords, but by the power of faith. Where you see over here, right at the outset of the battle, Devorah tells him, rise, said Devorah to Barak, for today God will deliver Sisera into your hands. Indeed, God is marching before you. And later on, after the battle was nearly over, Barak pursued the chariots and the army up to Haroshet HaGoyim, but Sisera's entire army fell by the sword. No one survived. Incredible. And this theme of defending the Jewish triangle, the land, the people, and our way of life, our faith, our religion, goes back even further, before there was a Jewish army, when the nation of Israel first became a nation, when Moshe tells Bnei Israel, Adonai yilachem lachem ve'atem taharishun. God will fight the battle for you. You have to make an effort, but God will fight the battle for you and win the battle for you, and will bring about your salvation. Which brings us to the Jewish triangle, and actually the cornerstone of why my family and I made Aliyah. The Jewish triangle comprises of three equally essential elements that comprise the complete Jewish life. And I would like to say a disclaimer over here, because this is a triangle, one of the elements had to be on top, but that does not mean that it is the most important. And if I would have been able to figure out how to rotate this triangle every few seconds in the slideshow, I would have done so. But nevertheless, all three components are equally important. And the three components are Am Yisrael, the people of Israel, Eretz Yisrael, the land of Israel, and Torat Yisrael, our holy Torah, our guidebook. And while it's true that 2 out of 3 ain't bad, when the ideal is attainable, we need to make every effort to do so. It's no wonder that in Masechet Barachot Daf He, it lists 2 out of these 3 components as only being attained or acquired through pain or distress or suffering. You know, there's Torah, there's Eretz Yisrael, and there's Olam Haba that are acquired through Yisurim, through great suffering. Learning Torah and mastering it is not easy. It is enjoyable, but it is not easy. Being part of the Jewish people is not easy, and we are definitely experiencing that nowadays with the events taking place in our world. And of course, living in Israel is also not easy. Prior to making Aliyah 12 years ago, the puzzle of our life, my family's life, was missing a corner piece. And we were part of Am Yisrael. We lived and practiced Torat Yisrael, but we were living in Brooklyn. And not that there's anything wrong with living in Brooklyn, but we wanted our kids to grow up without any missing pieces to their puzzle. And so one of the greatest ideals of living in the Jewish state and defending the Jewish people and defending the land of Israel and defending the Torah is serving in the Jewish army. And that was one of the reasons why also we wanted to make Aliyah, because we wanted our children to serve in the army and defend the Jewish triangle. This wasn't easy, and it still isn't easy. In fact, it was the most difficult period of our lives, financially, professionally, emotionally, and personally, but we never regretted it for a minute because of what we see in our kids every day, not only our soldiers, but all of our kids. And if there is a ceremony and an event that really crystallizes this idea, if you've ever been to one, and we've been to 2 of them for our 2 sons in the army, but we've also been to one for a lone soldier that we hosted for a year, a dear friend of ours. This is the hashba'ah, the swearing in of the soldiers into the IDF. And it's a very emotional, very inspirational ceremony. Some of them take place at the Kotel, some of them take place in other locations. But of course, what you notice in this picture is that while they're swearing their allegiance to the country and to defending the land and the people, they're given their guns, but they are also given a Tanakh, a Bible. And there is no greater sight, in my opinion, of the epitome of what defending the Jewish triangle is when you see our boys, our soldiers in uniform with a gun in one hand and a Bible in the next hand, saying that they swear that they will defend the people, the land, and our Torah. I think that is the ultimate expression of defending the Jewish triangle. And my wife and I and our entire family are extremely proud that my sons are able to do it at the highest level, being in a commando unit and making us proud every single day. So I wish for all of you to have a easy rest and an inspirational, easy rest of the fast. Tizku b'nechamat Zion. This is my contact information, my phone number, my email address. I write almost licensed tour guide because I am currently in the tour guides course here in Israel. Within a year, I hopefully will have my license. So if anybody is planning a trip to Israel, I'm happy to help you with that. If you want to have any classes or learning or lectures between now and then, I am available and would love to constantly reconnect with my community. So if anybody has questions, since we have a couple of minutes left over, I'm happy to answer them.